everyone. This is the Kubeflow community meeting. Today we'll have a retrospective on our 1.3 release. My name is Yannis. I was the release manager for 1.3. And let me first of all share my screen. So can you see the Google Doc?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. For people who don't have the link, I will also paste it in the chat right now. Yeah, you can go there and add a comment anywhere you want. So today we'll have the release retrospective. Let's take 2 minutes to go over a few guidelines on how this meeting is supposed to work. Keep in mind everything I have made for this meeting. Most of it is based on what Kubernetes is doing. So I hope this works for us as well. But if anything does not seem to fit for us, please feel free to speak up and we can adapt for what makes sense to us. So in this meeting, we'll talk about what went well in this release, what we could have done better, and what we're going to do different next time. So feel free to add your item here and here, and we can discuss it. Please make sure to include your name and be ready to give elaborate on what you mean. Next, in general, we'll discuss solutions in changing our process and our tooling. There is no point in blaming and shaming. And since I think we're a lot today, please make sure to mute your microphone if you're not speaking. Okay, so you can find our current processes in issue 1777, which we used to release for 1.3. This is the one. And for docs, there is an old document in Kubeflow that is mostly obsolete, but still contains some relevant information for docs. And I'm also counting on Rui to help me remove the craft and just keep the useful info there.
Happy to help there. Yeah. So actually, it's very useful for docs. It's still the guide to release. It's the only place where it is. Even if some
this one,
yeah, exactly. Even if some of the things there actually need to be updated, and some require permissions still from Google, but it's anyhow useful. So I'm happy to go over it with you and try to improve it.
Awesome. So yeah, that's the intro. I think we can get started. In general, we have the following section. First, what went well, then what could have gone better. We have a lot of items to discuss here and for docs as well. And then a section on important next steps that we're going to take. So I'll be your host today, and I'll also be taking notes. And so I'll try to time box stuff so that we can manage to go through everything today. But in case we get stuck on an item and there's more discussion there, let's open an issue and take it there. So we can go over all the items. Okay, so let's get started. What went well in 1.3? So in 1.3, first of all, it was our first release with our new working group structure. So that's a win. That means it works. Then in 1.3, we had quite a lot of features compared to 1.2 across working groups. We had new UIs, we had new stuff across the board, a big refactoring in manifest. Then, yes, the third bullet again is that in manifest we had a lot of simplifications, both in how we structure manifests and in the tooling as well. Right now we are using standard tooling and everyone can bring in their own deployment tool. And another important item that I think was useful for people who didn't follow the community meetings closely was to send updates to the mailing list, to the Kubeflow Discuss mailing list, in order to reach more people. I think there are quite a lot of people on this mailing list, so it was the most was the best place to give release updates. Is there anyone here who followed the list and perhaps found that useful or not?
I think this goes without saying, looking at the comments as well. It really was helpful.
Oh, yes, I see the comment from Malini right below. So that's nice. There are 2 comments. Okay. So let me delete those so I don't get distracted again. So yeah, it seems that this was something that people liked, and it was bringing everyone in sync. Everyone knew where we were at any point in time. Now let's talk about things that could have gone better in 1.3.
Oh, Giannis, just one other point I'd make on documentation. I think that our notes in the meeting, notes were stronger and more comprehensive as well. So beyond the Kubeflow discuss, I think the meeting notes were better documented.
And I think a lot of working groups were also sending to the mailing list, to the meeting notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that.
I think I added a couple of things on documentation down below, but now I see that it's what could have gone better. So I think I have a positive note on docs, or a couple of positive notes on docs that I will port here.
Feel free to add them.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Okay. Yeah, one was the latest contribution of completely fresh KFP docs from Google. I think those were a good contribution. And then the openness from the community to refactor very high level things from the getting started and all the collaboration that went into that. I think it was quite positive.
Thanks a lot, Rui. Yeah, and I absolutely agree as well. Does anyone else want to add any item here in what went well in 1.3? If not, we can let's move on to what could have gone better in 1.3. So, an item here. I think we could have done a better. Sorry?
Is it just for me that you're freezing? Maybe it is. Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt then.
Oh no, I think so. Can everyone hear me now? Is my connection okay? Okay.
Fine for me, yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So one thing I believe we could have done better is to plan the exact timeline and announce it sometime before than we actually did in this release. So I think it would be better right at the start of the release to post an exact timeline, especially now that we are more familiar with the individual steps. So then everybody is in sync about where we are, where we want to go, what the deadlines are. And this is also combined with the next point that we didn't have, we could have better communication in the release phases. So for example, it wasn't clear to many people what the release candidate meant exactly, or when new features could go in, or when new features could not go in anymore. And later releases should make sure to communicate that and actually define it more strictly. So I think we should have something like a terminology page which says, here are the release phases, and here is exactly what its release phase means. So let me. Okay. So I would love comments from everybody on this. So what do you think?
Yanis, I just had a quick question. So the release phases will also include the components and their release phases and how it's all tied in, because I think that was one of the issues for 1.3 release. It wasn't clear how they're all tied in with regards to planning, not just how they go in the code.
Thank you, Joanna. Can you elaborate a bit on this? I think I understand, but I would like to make sure.
So, for example, Kubeflow pipeline, what is their release phases and how is that going into the Kubeflow 1.3 release and when? For example, maybe they're releasing a version at this date and then 1.4 will pick it up at this date and should be completed at this date. That's what I'm thinking.
So an exact timeline of the phases?
Yeah, with regards to other components too, not just Kubeflow 1.3, just so we can see how all these components are coming together. And if there's one that's delayed, we'll know that the whole thing is going to be delayed.
I agree.
Kind of similar. Oh.
So please go on.
This is kind of similar of what I've been thinking about for the upcoming release as well, is that there need to be some clear definitions about the relationship between the versioning and release cadence of the different components and the overall Kubeflow releases. And if there's something that we can standardize the versioning for the components and how those are tested, I think that the release process can probably be mostly automated in the future.
So if I understand correctly, David, you're saying to take into account the individual release cycles of each component for the platform release. Is that what I'm hearing or not?
To a point, what I also mean is mainly in relation to the versioning of the individual components. So let's say Pipelines releases a new patch version, then in the new patch version for Kubeflow, the new patch of Pipelines manifest would be used, and similar for other components. And if a structure like that gets set up, then it's just a matter of automating the releases and the syncing of the upstream manifests to the new versions that get created there.
Okay, I think so. If I understand correctly, let me write it down. You're saying that we should add some automation in the way we construct the manifest repo, right?
Right, yeah. So the way the manifest repo is constructed and how versions of Kubeflow relate to the versions of the individual components.
Okay. Does what? So you see what I'm writing? Does it? Is it accurate? What you meant?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about this more in the future. I don't want to hold up the retrospective on things for doing in the future, but
no, it's no problem. We can. I think it's a good point. We can make a note and tackle it in the future, as you say. Okay. So first of all, Malina, I saw that you tried to add a comment here, but we got our text mangled. So please feel free to add it now. Sorry about that. Then, okay, so this is a minor but important thing, I feel, this one. So we had some deadlines that we scheduled on days that were not community meetings or weren't the day after a community meeting. And I think from our experience so far in the release, every deadline, every important deadline that concern, especially ones that concern the whole community, like a Kubeflow release, should be scheduled on a date of a community meeting or the day after the community meeting, so that we have the opportunity to get all in the same room and say, yes, we agree that everything is okay, and tomorrow we're going to do that. It's just much easier. What do you think? Do you agree?
It sounds good. Never really thought about
I
planning
somewhat
that
agree.
way.
The only thing I would say is that it kind of limits you to Tuesdays, right? So your cycle for iteration becomes every Tuesday. And maybe that's not fast enough.
It's even a little worse because, you know, every other Tuesday we're in the bad time zone for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. To be clear, I'm not saying that we should block our work and only make progress each Tuesday. I'm saying that if we have an important deadline, like cutting a release or something like that, it's better to do it after a meeting. It's not that we shouldn't do work in the meantime. It's and I think from my experience so far, it just works better. Like more people are there. If there is any problem, it will come up. It's just more. How do you say it? More safe.
I think what you're saying is for things that are planned in advance, like not something where there's work that's just happened immediately and you need to release it, but something where, you know, a month from now, we know we're going to be doing a release, and whether we did it on this day versus a couple of days later, it wouldn't make a big deal. For those sorts of things, it would be useful to plan them near the meetings.
Yes, Andrew, you said it much better than me. Thank you.
I think it makes sense to schedule a date on the exact day of the community meeting day. If we schedule one day after that, I think it also makes sense, but it probably has some risk that people are trying to chase the deadline. So they kind of like focus on the working instead of joining the community meeting. So you get lower attendance during the meeting. And then people say, oh, let me meet the deadline of Wednesday. So I have to skip the Tuesday meeting. So, and then we lost the opportunity of like talking with them and try to associate more. But I in general agree with the meeting day align with the release day. As long as it's not Friday release day, it's okay.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. The way I was thinking about it is that like we are all in the burn down phase, and then we make it by the community meeting. In the community meeting, we say, okay, we made it. We cut tomorrow. Good work, everybody. But yes, what you're saying could be a risk. People chasing the deadline.
Yeah, it's just like one of my thinking, but if the community thing is okay, this is not a big concern. I also am okay with like scheduling the release the day after the meeting day. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think most of us agree that one of those days are pretty good, as Andrew said, for deadlines that are known in advance and are a pretty big deal, like release deadlines. Like you want the release to be good, even if you have to delay it 2 more days in order to sync the community meeting. Okay, so next item. This is also relevant to the previous one, that we inadvertently scheduled some deadlines on some dates that were public holidays. And this is, I know this is very hard to not do that. Like there are a lot of holidays scheduled around, but in general, it would be good to try and avoid big holidays. And if we do both of those together, I think we'll have a very good guideline for where to place our deadlines. Okay. Then this is a procedural thing, but some of you have already noticed. So in our current process, we first cut a release candidate for the Kubeflow components. Then we synced that to manifest. And then after nothing went wrong and everything was great, we never actually cut the stable version because there were no bugs to go in. So we just forgot about it. And obviously we shouldn't do that. We should do a stable version just because it confuses users otherwise. So an explicit action here would be to document it for the next person as an explicit step to make sure everybody has a stable release to include in Kubeflow manifest. So I think Rui and David noticed, and definitely this is something that we should fix for 1.3.1 onwards. Any comments here?
Just a quick comment. I think a lot of these issues would become less relevant with automation.
I agree. I also think, though, that the first step would be good documentation, which we can then automate, as you said exactly.
Oh yeah, for sure. I completely agree. It needs to be there needs to be a good process that needs to be worked out before it can actually start automating things.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant. So related to this thing as well, when we made the release, so what is a Kubeflow release? A Kubeflow release is a tag, right, in a Git repo. Well, actually, previous Kubeflow releases also used a thing that is called the GitHub release. And the GitHub release is just a wrapper around a tag. Let me show you what the GitHub release looks like. So if you go here and you click on releases, this is what a release looks like. So it's just a wrapper around the tag. And even though we have the 1.3 releases, GitHub doesn't show them here because we haven't explicitly created what is called the GitHub release. So in later versions, since we already do it in the project, it would be easier and more and better for the users to simply create also a GitHub release here, so that when you go to Kubeflow, you see 1.3.0 here and it manifests.
I can second that. From my organization, I know at least once, I think it was with 1.2, but I don't remember. Once we just weren't, the people managing our release were not following the right issues, and they didn't realize that 1.2 had been released for a long time. They were paying attention to the Kubeflow repo, noticing it wasn't saying 1.2, and so they just thought that meant that it wasn't released. And it was a bit of, it's not like marking it in Kubeflow manifest is wrong, but there's a couple of different places that someone could look at that seem to be the authoritative source, and they weren't in agreement.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. I'm taking an explicit note of that. So it was not clear what the authoritative source was. And if it's okay to say which organization was that, so I can note that as well.
Oh yeah, with Statistics Canada.
All right. Awesome.
Yes,
Okay,
I also wanted to say,
Mm-hmm.
it's not too late to actually promote the 1.3 tag as a release on GitHub. We can still do it. I see it's
Absolutely,
not,
yes,
yeah.
we will do it. Actually, I had a PR that went in today, so you should see it today. Awesome, I think.
I
see that
added
everyone
this.
is- Hmm?
Yeah, just say that I added kind of the same point, kind of below. Sorry, I didn't read all of the points that were previously there.
That's cool. That means you agree, though, right?
Yeah, +1.
Awesome. Okay, I think we are all in agreement here. And perhaps, okay, so Andrew, since you said that in 1.2 there it was not clear if there was an authoritative source, I have a question for you. In 1.3, we were sending emails, and I remember that we included an issue inside, which was 1777, which was the release tracking issue. It was this one. So was this issue helpful in tracking the release? Was it clear that this was the authoritative place?
Yeah, we were definitely more in tune with the 1.3, but it was partly because we got confused by 1.2, so we were very proactive in knowing what was happening with 1.3. And even then, just a few days ago in one of our stand-ups, someone was surprised that 1.3 had been released. So we, even internally, we're maybe 90% covered, but not fully covered. But yes, tracking issue like that, it's very helpful. Like I think a couple of us were in tune with what was happening because of that.
No, that's great to hear.
Something like that is good too, just because it's like a set it and forget it. You know, I can subscribe to it, and then I can just not have to worry about checking. I'll get emails from GitHub every once in a while, and I know what's going on.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were going for, exactly, with the emails as well. So if you have any further ideas on how we can make this better, please feel free to add them. I think it should be clear and easy for people to follow.
One small things about the umbrella issue that Yannis want feedback on. On the issue page on the right-hand side, you can actually click the ping issue. So you'll be able to see this issue on top of the issue tab on the Kubeflow manifest, so people can easily navigate towards that.
So you mean go here?
Go back to the issue detail, and then go to the right-hand side. Right-hand side has a button called ping issue. If you scroll down a little bit, yeah.
Well. This is not a bad idea at all. This is a very good idea. Okay, let's note this down.
Thanks. Yeah, and by the way, Kubeflow pipeline is already using it to ping some like important announcement or some big issue, so people can easily find that.
All right, awesome. Yeah, this is, we should definitely do this.
So Jonas,
Thanks a
what's
lot.
the blocker for the GitHub release? What's keeping us from doing that?
What do you? How do you mean, Jeff?
So I mean, we make these RC candidates, but we've never gone the next step to actually make a GitHub release. Is that?
Why, you mean why we haven't done it?
Yeah. Is that a procedural issue? We need specific approval?
No, it's not a procedural issue. So the reason we didn't do it is because the RC was just worked, it didn't have any bugs. So the need just never came up, and we just missed it in the process. That's why I'm saying we should note it and not miss it next time.
Perfect.
But yes, there is nothing blocking us there. Also, Malini, thanks a lot for taking notes. It's a huge help because it's difficult to do both at the same time. Okay, so I think we all agree here, and thanks a lot for the great suggestions. Then, okay, I want to talk a bit about, so this is more general and more regarding the individual working groups that they should perhaps take this into consideration, is that there was some confusion over what features should make it in the 1.3 release. So I think from everybody's side, we should make an effort to discuss all big features beforehand in each individual working group and decide upon them in the start of the release. So so everybody can be more in sync. From people involved in individual working groups, I'd love to hear more about what you think of this item.
So Jono here. So in earlier releases, we actually had this priority tags, and that would be one way to understand what are the blockers and what are the feature requests and what is the priority attached to each of the issues. So should we think something related to that, so that like even users who is having a look on a particular repository, they will understand that these are the main features that people are working on, and this will come up in the upcoming release, etc.
Thanks a lot, John. Yes, I actually remember that Jeremy was using that method. What I remember from this method, though, is that it was helpful when we were at the end of the release, because we just needed to make a quick decision about everything, and whatever would go in was P0, everything else was P something other than 0. But I remember also that there were a lot of issues that were P1, so it was not clear in its release which would get worked on, or at least which we planned to get in for that release. I don't know if you remember the same experience.
Right. I agree there. I think probably like our miscalculation made much of an issue to be tagged as P1. But I could actually see many issues which are long pending for probably like months, and people are asking for updates. So in that case, it would be helpful even for users to understand whether this would actually come up in the upcoming release or not. And there are certain blockers if something is not working in a particular distribution, or like even in common Kubernetes, we have to really figure out a way to make sure that like that actually goes in the upcoming release.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. So would the those high priority issues you talk about be stuff like issues with a lot of upvotes or something like that?
Right. Like for example, like in say if we take like pipelines example, what would be like the in cluster issues that people are looking at? the default installation of Kubeflow has multi-user installation, right, of pipeline. So once they install notebook and then see that in cluster doesn't work, they basically like get into the first impression would be like, oh, Kubeflow doesn't work. So it's important to basically give more clarity on what things are supported, what things are not there, and then timelines on the issues which are pending.
Yes, I get. You mean I get. I think I get it a bit. So you mean especially for things that are known issues and that affect a lot of people, they should be discoverable and presented up front. Like you will have this issue. We know about it.
And if you see the Slack channel of Kubeflow, there are people who are reporting the basic issues where they are not able to do something, right? So how do we get those comments and make sure that like it doesn't repeat in one of the upcoming releases?
That's a great comment, actually, and it would be great if we had a sort of pipeline where we direct people to open an issue or upvote an existing issue if they are affected by something, so that we can somehow crowdsource the triaging process.
Right.
Right. So if everybody upvotes an issue, then it's probably very important. We should prioritize it.
Right.
But yes, I absolutely agree. So from my side, I was also thinking that perhaps working groups could do something like an umbrella issue at the start of the release saying that, and also, of course, a discussion in their meetings that we're thinking about working on this, this, and this. These are the issues. But we may or may not, and maybe priorities as well, like these are the things that we absolutely want to make. These we may or may not make for the release, but you can also help us there. So that everything is in one place, and if someone wants to see what this working group is working on this release, they can go to that issue and find out. Doesn't have to be what happens, just an idea.
Yeah, agree there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It also tells us how hard a feature or issue is to fix, because you might say 10 to start off and maybe only 2 or 3 get done because they're very convoluted.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. How much effort does an issue take? Okay, so let's see. Oh my God, we have so many items. We also have docs. Okay, we will continue, but I'm not sure if we will have time to do everything now. So I would say, let's devote the next 5 minutes to the general issues, and then we can cut the rest of the time to docs, so we can do some of that as well. Then some issues a small issue that we have was that some actions required some coordination between time zones. So one of these actions, for example, was to cut releases. It turns out that we have already a very good process for that, which are some ACLs that the release manager should be added to. And then they will have access to do these actions. So this is a good, this is a thing that we need to document for the next release manager. And it would also be good to have people in different time zones as helping in the release in order to somehow ease this burden. And make let's have a quick feedback on this. What do you think? Everyone agree? Okay. So then, an issue that we have was that many working groups didn't have an established process in place for releasing manifests. Because, of course, the release process changed in 1.3 with the new manifest structure. So most working groups that I know of, we work together to develop a release process based on release branches, which is for each major release, cut a release branch, then cherry pick fixes on that branch and cut tags for release commits, which allows to do minor releases without slowing down development in the main branch. And I think since now that we have this process, we should make it very clear and document it for every working group, what exactly their process is for releasing manifests under this new working group structure. So people from working groups, do you agree?
Hi, Yanis, can I have a quick question here?
Absolutely.
Is it possible to actually follow the same release process for each working group regarding to the releasing manifests?
That's a good question. I would think so, yeah. Do you see any block here?
I think it's like more question to other working group leads, if there are anyone here.
I'm not saying you should absolutely follow the same release process. Like if something makes more sense for you, then by all means. But I'm saying that this is something that we already do for Katib, for Kubeflow, and whatever your release process is, we, especially if it changed now with the manifest, we need to make sure that it is documented.
Yeah, maybe. Because like, I don't know if all of the working groups actually follow the same structure with branches and with tags, which is like Kubeflow is following right now, and which we are trying to follow in Katib. So I don't know, how does it work in other working groups?
And that's okay. I think the first step would be to explicitly document it. So for example, in Kubeflow, right now we have this documentation. Let me show you. We have a folder called releasing, which has a README with actions to release. So this would be, I guess, the first step for everyone to have.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I agree. Yeah, we should just create this page for each working group.
Awesome. All right. Oh, wow. Okay, so I feel bad because we only got through my points and we didn't get through Josh's points, James' points, Jonas' points. But I will skip a bit to docs because we haven't said anything about docs, and I'd like to be able to get some discussion in. But if it makes sense to continue the discussion, then we can either make this meeting last a bit longer, but I know people probably won't be able to do that, so that's okay, or make it another time, maybe for the next community meeting or the one after that, or a separate date altogether.
Docs are very quick, I think. So we already touched on the point of you have here the current process for a website is up to date. I think we touched already up in the first thing. So we can work on together on getting that up to date. And I just +1 your first point. That is a bit aligned also with the next thing, which is it's still hard to have working groups, pushing the documentation at the same time. And of course, it's open source project. You cannot force people to go into this, but we should kind of incentivize good practices. And one thing that we still saw was things like, for instance, the training operators for TensorFlow and PyTorch, which are very things that everyone might use, and it was outdated for months, and it was just about going there and verifying that actually it was not version specific, most of the things, and remove the out of date banner, but we didn't have the right owners there.
So could we go back to the first point just for a minute? I'm curious whether I think we would benefit from when a feature is documented in terms of the software work that's going to be done. If we would also spend a little bit of time laying out what needs to happen in the documentation in order to effectively support that feature in the docs. If it's an update that's going to actually make some of the documentation incorrect, we should call that out. If it's brand new, typically that's a little bit easier, but then if it's brand new, we need a little bit more of a description as to how this is going to affect users in order to guide the development of documentation. So just a little bit more thinking up front about the impact on docs for any feature, any software feature that we're building.
What I think could help with that. Oh.
No, go ahead, David.
What I think could help with that, and something I've brought up before in the past, is to have some kind of cohesion between the docs that are synced with the website and the docs in the code repositories where people are working, because I think people will be more incentivized to keep the docs that are in the repo where the code is that they're working on up to date with new features, and they're more likely to forget to update the website repository so the docs there are up to date.
I think that's a great point. And to add to Shannon's point as well, I would like to ask working groups to consider making doc writing a part of the feature development process. Like if you introduce a new feature, you should also have docs with it. Otherwise, it's just not complete. Right now, we are releasing, and then we are focusing our attention on docs, which it's something that we've done, I mean, for the whole history almost of the project. But I think it's just more manageable if we do docs when we do a feature. What do you think, Shannon?
It's certainly my belief that a feature is not done until the docs are ready. If users aren't supported in using the feature, then you don't really have a feature. Nobody who uses a piece of software doesn't use the documentation. So it really, in my view, it's always been the case that the docs are part of any feature. So I would fully agree with what you're saying.
Thanks. And yeah, so if working groups agree, I mean, consider making it part of your process and part of your guidelines for contributing. This is what I guess I was getting to, like.
Agree.
All right. Anything else we want to discuss on docs? Going once, going twice.
The only last piece on doc is that I think there is a recognition that there is a user responsibility to help with the documentation, and that the open source documentation may be less than a curated version of documentation from a package distribution.
So you mean where do we draw the line between?
How much does the open source documentation, because there's different ways to implement, how much does the open source documentation have to do? But maybe there's a template, or like we have template for certain things. Maybe there's just some certain expectation you set on documentation to get over the hurdle.
I think that's a good question, and like what I would ask is, for example, in Kubernetes, how do maintainers know when this is their issue versus when they tell you, go speak with GKE or go speak with EKS, because your issue is with them, it's not with us.
I think also that or what Josh is getting to here is what part of the documentation is the responsibility of the community and like the open source Kubeflow, and what part of documentation should be redirected to distributions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If we see, so I guess if we wanted to answer that, perhaps we should try to find like an extreme and then try to figure out where the line is from there. Like find an issue that is characteristically out of the community's responsibility to answer, and find an issue that is characteristically inside the responsibility of the community to answer, and then try to go from there. Is how I would approach it, at least.
Yeah, I agree. That's probably the best way to figure out where the line should be drawn, is by having extreme examples.
All right.
Well, I guess the other point that I would make is the users often need to provide that feedback about whether the user documentation is good enough. And at some point, we need users committed as the code contributors are to be in that release process to look at the docs. So I'm not saying we can do that right now, but when we look at that, it's like somebody from the user, some people from the user community probably need to be contributors.
I'm not sure I understood that exactly, but we can continue discussing in an issue or in the doc.
I think what Josh is saying is like have users like QA to vet the docs. I mean, is it adequate type of things?
It would have implications for the release process. Yeah, there would have to be a stage where, as part of once the RC goes out, or some earlier version, you could get users to agree to QA, as Melanie said.
Maybe there's just a comment period, right? Where users are, hey, users, RC's out, look at the docs before we go. Anyway.
No, that's a good point. Right now we have this period for the distributions. So distributions are more advanced users, like they know how to integrate Kubeflow and actually make it available for users. But I think that's a very interesting idea that we could explore. And again, thanks a lot, Malini, for taking notes. Okay, so we only have 1 minute left. And I will just, so for next steps, we also have a lot of things that are actually next steps here. So we need to distill them and add them here. But one of the core deliverables for 1.4 would be to have actual detailed documentation with all the things that we said so far. And of course, with the process, with the release process, step by step, so that anybody can take the handbook essentially and follow it. There are still some missing pieces, but I think for 1.4, this should be a very important deliverable. And of course, I should call out that we didn't do all of these items today. But I don't know, do you want to do 5 more minutes, or does anyone have a meeting? I don't want to force people to stay. What do you think?
I'm okay with 5 more minutes. And I have another question, like some of our components have different versions of some libraries. Is there any desire to have the same version of a requirement or dependency? I mean, it's nice that containers let you do anything different ways, but I was just curious.
I actually ran into that with the notebook images, where the version of KFP and the latest version of KF serving packages were not compatible due to dependency conflicts. So
wow.
Yeah, I agree. I had the same issue there. Yeah.
Right. So that was causing problems with obviously with creating a container, and for that reason, older versions of both packages were used, which were obviously not optimal for the for this release. So in terms of dependency management and what versions or version requirements to use, especially for things like SDKs, that should be taken into account, that they're all compatible with each other.
So I think it's a great discussion. Could you, I think you both brought up examples. Could you perhaps add these examples in the notes? That would be awesome. All right. So let me go through the remaining things quickly so I can take advantage of these 5 minutes. First of all, when cutting a new release branch in a repo, pro testing is not enabled. There is some process there. We need to make a PR in the testing repo. I've already done it once. I've included the PR. We should document this, and in the future, perhaps also automate it. Then, Josh said here that we should consider producing a changelog or similar for each release and have a count of issues and PRs closed in each release. I think that would be awesome. How would that happen? Would each working group have its own changelog, for example?
Actually, there's some tag in GitHub that you can put saying /release or something. So things that are just test related or others, you don't put that tag, but things that are user facing, you put that tag, and then it gets pulled in together for the release notes.
All right, that sounds like a great idea. So.
I don't have the exact detail, but I know there's something like that. It's followed, I think, in Kubernetes maybe.
Okay, that sounds.
Yeah, Jeff, we used to tag the issues with a release, remember?
I think I remember something like that, yeah.
And then they flowed into like a Kanban board, but whatever. It'd just be nice to have some comprehensive view that's automated. It may not be 100% correct, but at least we get 90 or 95% of the issues. So
I think the way to make that happen would be for each working group to adopt it into its release workflow. Like people from each working group, please consider adopting such a process in your workflow.
yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is like the pipelines people, when they came out with V1.5, which is in Kubeflow 1.3, they have a change log that they can produce for that.
The v1.2 release on the Kubeflow repo also has a change log, I believe, in it.
So it sounds like something we should give more attention to then. Okay, so my 5 minutes are up. Sorry for taking extra time, everyone. We can continue discussing this perhaps in a separate meeting or the next community meeting or in an issue. And
I just have one request on the ones that are left there. I think the list of dependencies is important, but also I would really like to see if the working groups would present their roadmap to the community sometime at the beginning of the release, just so we all come together a bit. I think that's
very good. Yeah, yeah. In fact, in another project, what we used to do is we used to have like a joint project roadmap and say what's in, what's out, and play those games with t-shirt sizes too.
I don't know this game.
Oh, like it's a small feature, small, large feature means it might be broken over a few releases. That's what we mean. Like very rough estimate of how complex an issue is, like small, medium, large, extra large. But one other thing, sorry. It was about like composition of the next release team and like volunteers. That's something that hasn't got addressed for time reasons.
So I think that's what we're going to do. Let's fix another date. So because we still obviously have quite a few items that we haven't addressed yet, let's fix another date to continue this discussion so that everyone can attend, and we can we can discuss all other items there and complete this document. What do you think?
Yes.
So
yes, make it and probably make it independent from the community meeting, Yanis, so that people.
Right, I agree. Yeah, because we took one
stuff.
meeting, we can't take everything. Yeah. Okay, everyone agrees? Sounds good. Awesome. So thank you again, everyone, for coming today and helping us with this release retrospective. I'm sure this would be immensely helpful for making our process better. Let's continue this on a later date in order to get through everyone's suggestions. It was great seeing you today. See you soon.
See you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Giannis.
Thank you, Yanis.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.